Now, Chay Bowes, my good friend and my go-to, frankly, for what's happening in Russia and Ukraine, to which we will turn in a minute, I promise you, is a master of the political arts. Literally so. He's an MA in politics, but he's an even better commentator. And he's very seldom wrong. And he joins me now from, I presume, Moscow. Chay, great to see you again. I'd like to start with the developments in the sphere of extraterrestrial alien life. Maybe we'll have time to get to that, but before that, we must talk about the alien life assembled without Arctic camouflage. Talk about sitting penguins in Greenland. The expeditionary force of Starmer, Macron, and Meloni. You couldn't make this up, could you, Chay?
Just listening to your masterful introduction there and your monologue, it's always just great. I mean, look, one word came to mind, and it's this German word. And I suggest everybody get on Google now, not while the show's on, as soon as it's finished, and look up the term Schadenfreude. And Schadenfreude is, I think, the sense which many people on our side of the political divide and the sort of the divide between what's been happening, this war machine, this terrible hegemonous machine that has, littered corpses across the globe in the post-war period, the post-Second World War period, as it massacred the continents, Africa, Asia, from Vietnam, Korea, and the silence of the sort of supplicant European countries as this brutal machine sort of did its business has been deafening. And we've seen it most recently in Ukraine, of course, a Nazi supporting regime, grossly corrupt, people like you, people like Guy, who have come out to tell the truth about Ukraine, vilified, marginalized, arrested, denied our rights, our privileges, attacked at every end. And suddenly we see that this tiger, which the Europeans very sort of aggressively in some ways thought that they were superior to as well. There's a sense of this European superiority when it came to America. They were great for security, great for the muscle. The big dumb American cousin was going to keep the Russians away. And we now see that this perceived Russian threat. I mean, we were told in the 1970s perpetually, consistently, that the Russians were going to invade Europe. Well, the Russians were saying, look, the Europeans will do a very good job at destroying themselves. We probably don't need to do anything at all. The capitalist systems that have, delivered us here, if you like, are so corrupt and so focused on profit that there's probably not a lot we need to do to sit back. Now, of course, the Europeans and their American masters were very good at undermining the Soviet project. It collapsed. And a lot of the geostrategic and geopolitical issues we have now on the continent of Europe are, remnants of that delusional attitude. But right in the midst of all this now, it's quite remarkable to watch these headless chickens rushing around. I read today that Mr. Macron announced that the European Union would use a bazooka of essential sanctions, but they are actually, in fact, tariffs against the United States, the anti-coercion instrument, which is a draconian set of laws that the Europeans hold in reserve to prevent themselves being coerced into any sort of issue globally. And that's going to be deployed potentially against the United States of America. I also wrote recently that the European Union were compiling a significant list of sanctions and countermeasures against the United States, and there was a lot of kickback against that online, saying, "Oh no, that's not the case. What is your source?" Of course, I have sources who talk to me, people in the European Parliament who are on these committees, which are trying to get ahead of this remarkable situation where a dog that the Europeans always believed intellectually they had on a leash has broken from that leash now and is gnawing away at a significant territory, which is the the thiefdom, if you like. Because remember, George, if you look, and I wrote about this as well, uh, if you look at the history of Greenland, the history of the abuse of the indigenous Inuit people by the Danes, right up until the 1980s, the Danish authorities were forcibly sterilizing young girls as young as 11 and 12 years of age, Inuit children. The people there were pushed into local industry. Their history and their culture was completely ground into dust. For the crown, remember, this is a royal country. This is the Danish monarchy, remember, as well. And as an Irishman and you as a Scotsman, I don't think we're great monarchists. And the remarkable sense for me right now is one of Schadenfreude, seeing this empire which propped itself up. The Europeans always with this faux sense of outrage and liberalism, the anti-war movement, which was completely decayed in Europe on the left. Whereas now we see only an anti-war movement in Ukraine, particularly on the right, remarkably. To see them now running, charging about in the halls of power in Europe, wondering how they're going to pull the American, this Leviathan, this economic, military Leviathan back into line. That's the sense right now in Europe. And of course, in Moscow, in Beijing, again, yet again, those two great countries get to sit back and watch this machine essentially pull itself apart. It's quite remarkable.
Well, this comedian Callas, who is our foreign minister, though we of course never elected her any more than we elected any of these panjandrums in the European Union, she at least got one thing right in her hopefully brief tenure as foreign minister. She said they are laughing in Moscow and in Beijing, and Schadenfreude, that wonderful German word, is of course entirely apt. Not that the Europeans are entirely without weapons to fire back. It turns out that Ozempic, 100% of Ozempic entering the United States comes from Denmark, and the Danes are warning as severely as they can to Mike Pompeo and all the others in the Washington class who are half the men they used to be. Thanks to Denmark and Ozempic, it's going to be stopped. They're not going to allow any more Ozempic to reach the shores of the United States. Maybe Danish bacon, maybe French fries, or freedom fries, we might rename them, will be stopped. But this joke, Dad's Army, it's actually funnier than Dad's Army, of the expeditionary force that's been sent. Now we learn from Bild, the 15 Germans in the joke are no longer, they have been recalled. They're not going to fight, are they? They're going to, as the Russian statesman Medvedev said, they're going to shit their pants and surrender. That's obvious, isn't it?
Look, I mean, it's hard to keep a straight face while you watch this happening. It's akin to having these neighbors who are, the people first into church on a Sunday, kids who do so well in school, never, raise a voice on a New Year's Eve, and suddenly you see them beating each other up in the front garden. It's hard to take your eyes off this as it occurs. And I've been watching it very closely, particularly the attempts at harmony. The European Union sort of issued a joint statement. Antonio Costa, the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, the usual stock drivel. We stand with Greenland and its people. We stand with the people of Denmark. Now, of course, they didn't stand with the indigenous people of Denmark. They don't stand with the people of Crimea, for example, who voted for autonomy from Ukraine. They don't stand with the people of Donbass, Donetsk. They don't stand with the Serbs, whose territory was carved up, as you say, and stolen from them to make an outpost within the heartland of the Serbian people, theft of the territory. They didn't stand with the people in Yugoslavia when their energy systems were bombed, destroyed, attacked, targeted, water treatment plants. And they don't stand with the people of Ukraine today as they're dragged from the street and sent to die in a perpetually failing proxy war. So what I see as the reality of where we are right now is the management of this collapse. How are they going to try to reverse themselves into some sort of plausible position? Regarding the deployment of the troops, George, I mean, whoever thought that this could possibly be a good idea, it reminded me of Winston Churchill. You know, the lack of statesmen. Whatever you think of Churchill, he was a great leader for Britain during the Second World War. The abject lack of statesmanship and the lack of people to step up to the plate now, while the European Union and NATO face their greatest challenges since their inception, is really remarkable to see. It's conspicuous by its absence. And as you mentioned, Kaya Kallas, this essentially diversity hire from the Minnow state of Estonia, who only knows how to hate Russia. That's the only reason she ever got her job, was because she hated Russia so much, despite being the daughter of the Soviet elite, and despite the fact that her husband made millions after the Russian intervention in 2022 with his transport company until he was caught by a newspaper. These people are completely vacuous morally, and when it comes to the crunch, they have nothing to say. You would imagine that if they were serious about the territorial integrity of Greenland or Denmark, they would immediately have done what Margaret Thatcher did in 1982, correct me if I'm wrong, and dispatch a large-scale force halfway around the globe, as Margaret Thatcher did. And again, as an Irishman, I have no particular graw or love for Margaret Thatcher. You, as a man who defended the miners, will not either. But regardless of that, we have to try and be objective. She was a leader who was true to her word. She was advised not to do it, but she dispatched this force. The Europeans have sent less than 20 men each, 15 of which have scurried away under the cover of night to come back as soon as Mr. Merz was faced with the reality of $15 billion a year in sanctions from the United States of America. It's quite remarkable. And as we say, only in the crucible and the furnace of these really difficult situations do people come to the fore. Maybe we should put people like Robert Fico and Viktor Orban at the head of the negotiation here, because the reality is, and the dogs on the street know in Europe, in NATO HQ and everywhere else, that if Donald Trump wants Greenland, he's having Greenland, whether he buys it, seizes it, or takes it through economic subjugation or blockade. And again, this is something that the United States has been doing since the end of the Second World War globally. And I've written this recently too, and this is important in my view. What we're seeing now is the empire of Trump. We're seeing the United States overtly do what it's covertly been doing for decades, George, as you well know, and many of our viewers will know. Operation Condor in South America, the overt and covert operations in the Middle East, the destruction of Iranian democracy, very current now, Mohammad Mossadegh's government destroyed in 1953. This playbook has been going on, but it's been conveniently done covertly. So the European elites who've coalesced with the American empire have been able to pretend it wasn't happening. But now they are on the menu. They're not at the table anymore. They're on the menu. They're on the platter, about to be consumed by this monstrous creation, which is unable to be brought to heel. The Europeans have hollowed themselves out. They've economically, militarily, and politically. There is no leadership with which to stand up that anybody of the ilk of Donald Trump would consider or listen to. He doesn't respect the Europeans. And that's why he feels he can bite the biggest chunk of its territory off and stand there and say, what are you going to do about it? And the reality is they're going to do nothing.
It's tragicomic, because this European continent was the king of the road. First the Portuguese, then the Spanish, then of course preeminently the British, but with some also Rands, with a colony or 2 or 5 or 10, but also Rands. This European hegemony, which dominated the world for 500 years, is now crashing and burning in ruins. Their own metropolitan heartlands are a husk, a shadow of their former selves, unrecognizable as their former selves, their economies crashing and burning, and yet we're asked to believe that Russia wants to end the war in Ukraine, America wants to end the war in Ukraine, but it cannot be allowed to end because of this Europe that is burning, literally as well as metaphorically. What does all this mean for the end of the conflict and the end of the agony of the peoples of the Ukraine?
Yeah, and of course, everything is linked on this global chessboard. Everything is linked. And what this really shows us is the lack of sincerity in any when it comes to any sort of positioning of the European Union, the lack of unity, the lack of sincerity in their desire to end the conflict in Ukraine, a conflict that they were hyper aggressive in cultivating, propagating, and igniting, of course, along with their American counterparts, if to the biggest part in the Maidan. Now, that civil war has rolled on, but now, of course, we see that this sort of obfuscation by Europe about even sending peacekeeping forces. We've seen this. Now we see what happens in Denmark when territory is actually about to be seized. They've sent less than 20 men apiece. The reality that Ukraine has been used as a somewhat willing patsy in its own country to try to inflict what is widely known as a desired strategic defeat on Russia. The RAND Corporation wrote the rule book about this. They told us exactly what they were going to do, how to unbalance Russia via Ukraine. We've known this since the Second World War. So what does it mean for Ukraine, what we see happening now? What it means is it obviously, in my view, emboldens Russia somewhat to the point where it reinforces the reality that Russia doesn't and shouldn't need to seek the permission of the European Union, which has demonstrated itself now beyond any sort of doubt as an utterly morally vacuous talking shop, which is only really concerned with the pensions of its unelected bureaucracy. It's also become an a la carte authority on things like the brutal treatment of the Ukrainian people by the dictatorship, which is Mr. Zelensky's unelected government. We've seen the gross corruption, the golden toilet. Today, I read Ukrainian journalist Diana Panchenko writing about the head of the SBU, the secret police. They're stealing $10 million a month. An ex-colleague of Mr. Zelensky's from his Kvartal 95 production company. This stuff is flushing out of Ukraine daily. Meanwhile, the ski slopes of Ukraine are full of the elites of this grotesque elites from this country stealing billions of dollars of hard-working European and American workers' money. It's absolutely grotesque. So I don't see how anybody now, even the most radical anti-Russian, could suggest that the Europeans have any moral authority remaining. And to me, this is a significant hollowing out and a quickening, if you like, of the collapse of the European Union and of NATO, something that I've predicted. None of these empires can persist indefinitely. And certainly an empire that won't defend its borders, George, refuses to defend its borders, is certainly doomed. As we saw with Margaret Thatcher, as I say, she dispatched this armada, whether you agree with her politically or not, the will for anybody in Europe to demonstrate, or in NATO indeed, to demonstrate that they're serious and to make Donald Trump think seriously about a stone in his shoe is completely absent. It's a vacuum. And inside that vacuum is a mirror. And the mirror tells us that everything that they've said to us about Yugoslavia, about Russia, about China, about the threat from abroad, the threat from outside, this garden that they're outside the European Union is a jungle, when they've created a jungle within Europe, where they vilified people like Orban, like Fico, like Babiš in the Czech Republic. This is the reality that we're seeing now. And many of us, me included, are enjoying it to some extent, the vindication of the reality that the European Union only ever talked a great game. It was never going to actually be serious about the defending the rights of anybody, least of all the frozen wastes of Greenland, which we know will, as a matter of course now, become American.